In this video tutorial, we're going to look at how we can use Excel Online to complete assignments for the class. Particularly, I'm going to focus on tasks that are not easily translated from the desktop application of Excel to the Excel Online version. So if you don't have Excel Online and you're trying to complete the assignments for GPH 301, you can still do them. There might be a few changes, but it's not a big deal. So I'm going to go to the Hurricane Exercise Part 3, which is the latest thing that we're working on. And what I want to do is I want to download the data that we're using for this exercise. So the Excel file here, you may not be able to open directly on your computer, but you will be able to open it through Excel Online, which you have access to through the university. So the first thing to do is to go to Canvas and download this Excel file onto your computer. So even though you don't have Excel, you want to save that file, and I'm going to save mine onto my desktop so that I have it locally accessible. Now the reason I'm doing it is because I'm going to open it up in the online Excel version. So there's other ways of doing this, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to use the connection that your email has to Excel Online as well as to the shared drive, the OneDrive that is offered through Microsoft. So if you log on to your email online, you should notice that in the upper left corner are these little dots that are the app launcher. If you click on that, you'll see that you should have access to a variety of different kinds of software, including, notice that Canvas is linked there too, at least it is on mine. What we want here though is Excel. So we're going to click on Excel, and that's going to open up that application. And we're going to upload a file to Excel. So the way it works is that you can drag a file into this space and it will automatically use it. So I'm going to move my browser to the side a little bit, and I'm going to drag a file. This is a file I just downloaded from Canvas. I'm going to drag it in there, okay, and it's going to upload it. And when it finishes uploading it, it's going to open up that file. If it errors out on you, just be patient, try it again. But this time it worked for me, so that's good. So we have here the data that we're working with through this exercise. So what I'm going to focus on for this particular exercise is how to build a histogram, because this works a little differently in Excel than it does in online than it does in the desktop application. So just so you know, you can actually make a histogram in Excel pretty easily. The problem is we don't have a lot of control over it, and it doesn't give us some of the information we want. So just to show you how you can make a histogram in Excel Online very quickly, I'm going to make one looking at the depths data. So I'm going to, as I normally would with any kind of chart that I want to create, I highlight the data that I want to put into the chart first, and then under the Insert menu, you'll see you have options for charts in the middle there. Under the other charts, there is an option for a histogram, which is down here. It says under Statistical. So if you click on that one, it'll generate a chart for you right there, which is fine. You can manipulate the chart title using the chart tools. Okay, so if I want to change the chart title, I can say, okay, I want to edit the chart title. That's what I want to do. So this is a histogram of depths. Right? Okay, so that's fine, and you can see it's broken it up into different bins. The problem is though that we can't easily manipulate this chart. So in fact, when I right click on it, normally in the desktop application you would have other tools available to you to manipulate what's in the data, but in Excel Online you have to work through the chart tools menu, and it's kind of limited in terms of what it allows you to change, and you can't easily change the bin. So what I want to do is I want to build this histogram from scratch in a way that will allow us to mimic what we're doing in the lecture video for Excel Online, the desktop application, excuse me. So just like we did online, we need to make the bins that we're going to use. So I call them depth bins. These are just going to be the way that we break up the data because we want to control that. And I started off by doing the max value to determine the ranges. I took the max value of my data, which was an F2 to F121, and divided it by 10, and that will give me the range size that I want to work with. once I have that, I can take that number and then add on 800 incrementally so that the range will grow incrementally by 800 as I copy that formula down, so I can go until I get to the highest value, which is 800. So I've broken up my bins into that. Now, the next thing I want to do is when I build a graph, I want it to label the x-axis, and unfortunately it won't do it automatically for me in a very easy way, so I have to create like a text label that will allow me to use that on the x-axis to label them. So these will be the labels, and what I want is to add in labels here that says what that number means. So this one would say 0 to 800, but instead of typing it, I'm going to be kind of clever here. I'm going to, or at least I think I'm clever, I'm going to concatenate pieces of the data here to make it easier. So the concatenate function is something we haven't used in class before, but basically it allows you to push together or paste together text, so you can create like a statement. And so here's what I want to do. I want to put together a statement that says 0 to 800. So the way it works is I put in quotes that part of the stuff that I'm actually writing out manually. So 0 to, and then a space to leave space, and then I put a comma, and then instead of typing 800, I type this, or I click on that cell. So what it'll do is when I hit enter, it substitutes that whatever the contents of the cell is for that text. So I can do the same thing over here. So this one's going to be easier though, because once I do this part, I don't have to keep typing. So I'm going to concatenate the this stuff. I'm going to say 800, and then in quotes, space, to, space, quote, comma, and then click on this cell and close the parentheses. And so that formula will say take the item in the first bin, put it and then put 2, and then put the second item. So when I hit enter, I have the text in there. So the value of doing it like that is that now I can just copy these things down and see how it puts in all my text. So it very nicely describes the ranges. Now I'm going to use that in my graph, right? That's the only purpose, but it just saved me a little time there. Now the heart of it though is of a histogram is to count the frequency of different numbers. So as you recall, that first bin is going to contain the, or we want to know how many years had between 0 and 800 deaths, right? So this is what we're asking for, is a frequency. So I'm going to put freak as a abbreviation. And so to count the frequency of years that met that criteria, I'm going to use a COUNTIF function. Okay, and the COUNTIF function lets me put in a range, like what am I counting, and then what exactly do you want me to count. So it's still the same range as before, F2 to F121, right? We're looking at the death data, but we're putting in criteria that says, okay, find me the situations where it's less than or equal to, and then, you know, in this case it'll be 800, but I'll substitute that by putting, instead of writing in actually 800, I'm going to use the cell reference, but I have to precede that with an ampersand or the and sign, and then I can click on the death bin value right there. And I'm closing off the parentheses. And so that formula right there is going to say count the number of instances that meet this criteria within that range. So I just hit enter and it gives me a count. So 116 years meet that criterion. Now I'm going to use this formula repeatedly down here. So what I want to do is I want to put the F2, I want to hold the F2 and F121 constant. So I'm going to put $signs around them. As you might recall, on a keyboard, it's function F4 that can do that for you. So, or you can just do it manually, it doesn't really matter. In any case, that way it will hold that steady, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this formula down to the others. Okay, now they're not correct right now. I'm going to fix those in a second. The second one, all right, so then there's two pieces to this. So these are the frequencies, but they're not correct yet because these are counting everything. And what I want it to do is I only want it to count within that bin. Right now it's counting everything. What we actually want is what's called a cumulative sum, and a cumulative sum is basically a running summary, right? So you're adding everything that comes before it is added to the next thing. So the cumulative sum here works in a very particular way. So the first part, we just take the value that's over here in the frequency, and we just kind of replicate it. But where things start to change is in that second cell. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add together the previous value. So what that means is we're going to take this and add it to this number over here. Okay, and what that does is it gives us a running sum, right? So right now that doesn't make sense, but watch what happens here. We're going to take this one right here, this value, and we're going to subtract the previous sum. Okay, so I'm going to subtract this thing right here. Now what that does is, now this makes sense. What's happening here is that this number 1 means that there were, for the 801 to 1600, which is really what this should be, but we can deal with that later if you want to, there was 1 year in which there were that many deaths, right? Between 801 and 1600 people died. It was only 1 year when that happened. Now when I changed that formula, it also adjusted this one. So this is now the running sum that was previously over here. The reason I did that is because this allows me now to remove those running sums. So this formula over here, I can copy this down here, okay, and over here, when I copy this down, okay, they get adjusted. So now you'll see that, that most of the bins are empty, but we can see, for example, in this bin, for 2401 to 3200, there were 2 deaths, 2 years in which there were that many deaths, between 2401 and 3200 deaths. Okay, over here on the right, you see this cumulative sum, and this cumulative sum tells you, basically keeps adding, but it doesn't change until you get an added number. So you'll see that it starts at 116, the 117 adds that extra 1, still stays at 117, and then we get over here, it adds that extra 2. So that's what that running sum is really doing. Now that cumulative sum is important, because what it allows us to do is it allows us to take the to calculate the cumulative percentage as well. And this is something that was in the default histogram that you build in Excel. So a cumulative percentage is just like it's similar to a cumulative sum. Let me wrap these guys. It's getting kind of messy over here. Still not wide enough. There we go. Do that. Wrap the text there. Same thing. Need to widen just a bit. Perfect. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this number, and we want to know what percentage of all of our data does that represent. So I'm going to use another function too, just like I did previously. I'll take the max values that are in here, okay, and that way I can get a percentage. So what this means is that 116 represents 96% of all years, right, in our data. Now what I can do with that, actually I got to fix this. This should all be in $signs too. So we'll put those, because that's going to stay the same no matter what. That max, what I'm doing there is I'm making sure that it's always divided essentially by 120. I'm using the formula though just to be consistent, so that regardless of what your data is, you don't make a mistake by transcribing something and typing it wrong. So when I copy this formula down, you can see how that cumulative percentage grows, but slightly, right? It only grows when there's an extra case added to those instances. So what we have now is we have essentially the data that we need to build the histogram. So now it works just like we do with any other kind of graph. What we do is we take the two the data series that we want to graph. We're going to make a bar chart, because that's essentially what a histogram is. And what we're doing is these are the labels that we constructed earlier, and then these the numbers over here are the values we want to see. So again, now I'm going to go to Insert, and instead of going to the other charts to do an automatic histogram, I'm going to use the column chart, because I already have all my data set up. So when I do that, I get essentially the same thing I had earlier. Now I've got a histogram, but I'm controlling the binning, right? How it's binned. And so this is the point. So what we're doing is we're replicating the histogram that you can make in Excel on the application on your desktop, but we're doing it somewhat manually. So there you go. That's how you make a histogram in Excel Online in the same way that you would make a histogram in the desktop application.